Your support helps us bring you programs you love. Go to wyomingpbs.org, click on Support, and become a sustaining member or an annual member. It's easy and secure. Thank you.
Wyoming's Red Desert on the next Wyoming Chronicle.
I think there's a term that's new called collateral damage, and that's what we're supposed to be looking at, I think, when we talk about disturbance by big industry in a place like the Red Desert. It's pristine. There are very few pristine places left where landforms are as they were 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, not only from a distance, but if you look on the ground, you still have the native plants and animals in a fairly coherent ecosystem or set of ecosystems. That gets damaged when you build lots of roads. And here's my example. Mike McClure used to live here in this town. This is where I live now. And I lived here then, almost 40 years ago. He's a well-known photographer. And we were friends, we went out in the desert to take pictures of Native American sites. He was compiling some photographic studies. And this was during the beginning of the oil boom in the late 70s. And what we saw just outraged both of us. Mike is from here. He went to high school or just down the road here. And the Red Desert was always the big empty to those people that grew up here. And all of a sudden there were oil rigs, yeah, we discussed that. There was always oil rigs out there in our time. But there were lots of subsidized rigs, and that meant a lot of roads and hundreds of people who were from some other place, usually the city, trying to make money. We saw young kids on four-wheelers and pickup trucks shooting .22s at anything that moved. That's what I mean by collateral damage. It's the roads, it's the people who are uninformed that come in with industry and development, doing things that, if no one's out there patrolling it, can be very, very destructive. You don't know what they are, which includes fires. We have world-class and very unique elk calving area near Steamboat Mountain in the Red Desert, and it's a unique and essential area for calving because of these tall sagebrushes that are Artemisia tridentata. Tridentata is a very special subspecies of sagebrush that grows 7 to 8 feet tall. And this affords the protection from things like eagles and other predators to newborn calf elk.
But you talk about collateral damage, John, if they're not protected either as a wilderness study area or as wilderness perhaps in the future. Again, how is that controlled or managed in best controlled or managed in your areas?
Well, I think you can keep oil development out. I'm speaking of oil development now. I'm not speaking of ranching, which I think has been there a long time. Historically, that's part of the wonderful part of the Red Desert is that family history of ranching out there. But oil development is a peculiar thing on the land because it brings lots of people in. And I think BLM is in a position to restrict areas based on wildlife or scenery or special recreational values. Restrict development of new roads, which would shut off oil and gas development. I'm not against oil and gas, by the way. Okay. No problem with oil and gas development. In fact, I wrote a letter in support of it in the Red Desert Basin area because it's already encroaching on that area and it's been going on there since the 1930s. I don't have a problem with oil and gas development. I do have a problem with it in areas that are unique in the world.
Dick, do you agree with that? That oil and gas should continue to be developed in the Red Desert in areas where it's been developed somewhat in the past?
Oh, absolutely. Mm-hmm. We have areas that historically have been developed for oil and gas. Some of the Wamsutter area, you might say the Bear Oil area, which has been there for a lot of years. I've staked well locations in those areas. And I burn oil and gas when I pull my mules around to get to a trailhead where I can go riding in one of the wilderness study areas. So not against oil and gas, but oil and gas does not exist every place. They have their areas where there is oil and gas, and I think it should be developed and is being developed, because you've got 1,000 wells right now in the Wamsutter area, and they plan 5,000 wells. That's fine. That's the area for it. But we have our areas where there isn't oil and gas and there isn't minerals, and those are the areas that we're talking about that should be protected.
Jenny, if people want to learn more about the Red Desert, you tell us a little more about the programs that you have, rather than just generally that you have programs. If someone's really interested, and Dick, I'll ask you this question too, and John too, what truly is the best way to understand more of the issues we're talking about today?
Well, it all depends on the individual and what they're looking for. I know that there are intrepid individualists that want to just go out in the Red Desert, and I recommend, getting a 4-wheel drive, high clearance vehicle, jack, tow rope, Denman maker, everything you need to get yourself unstuck, because if you get stuck, nobody's going to come across you. And then there's the next level up, or finding somebody that does go out there, which is hard to do in some ways. And then the final level, of course, the final levels would be joining an outing that a conservation organization does, such as the Wyoming Wilderness Association, where we have experts such as John that go out and lead outings. We'll take you on a hike. You can have a look at all of our offerings on the summer list, whether we've done yoga on the Oregon Buttes, we've done photography workshops, we've just done hikes on Continental Peak, whatever trips your fancy, really.
John, you've taken people around to the Red Desert for the first time. What's their biggest aha moment that you've come across? Where in the Red Desert might they really have their eyes opened?
Oh, there's so many different ways to answer that question, because it's not always just the land form. The place is changing constantly. The weather changes rapidly, as we all know. Those of us that have been out there, it changes very fast, and the low clouds move in, and all of a sudden you're in a fog and you can't see anything. You have to stop till it clears. But I suppose the Honeycomb Buttes is starkly beautiful in the color patterns if you like Badlands. Not everybody likes Badlands. I think the biggest aha moment I had this summer, and I took a lot of groups out there this summer, was we were driving along the Bar X Road up to Chicken Springs, and I think it was about 30 head of bull elk running parallel to us in kind of a pincer move, and they came within 20 feet of the sides of our trucks, and we had to slow for about a quarter of a mile. Beautiful animals, graceful, in perfect health, because that desert habitat is perfect elk habitat. And we had to slow down and let them cross the road in front of us because they weren't veering off. It was just a beautiful sight to see.
Dick, I'm sure you've seen several of those treats in your time in the Red Desert. Tell us about some of those.
Well, riding one time in the Oregon Buttes area, I was very surprised as I dropped down on a draw, and there was moose. Now, you wouldn't think the Red Desert would be moose habitat, but all of a sudden there's moose out in the middle of nothing but a sagebrush flat, and away they go. So you're surprised by things like that. I think you're surprised also by the wild horses. When you pack in the Red Desert or camp overnight, you're subject to these studs with the wild horse groups coming in and trying to steal your horses away. So you face that too, and it's not anything to face, but it is kind of unique to the Red Desert. One thing about the Red Desert that you won't see anyplace else, and I'm sure John will bear with me that, is watching the stars at night. There's no place like laying on your back in the Red Desert and looking at the stars. It's dry and it's clear, and you just don't see them anyplace else like that.
John, you agree with that? You've been all over the world?
Now, I don't tell people that very often, because I think everybody has a memory of seeing stars very clearly someplace. But I've been around in a lot of different places. I've been in the Mojave Desert, which is a lower elevation, and in deserts in Ethiopia and stared at the stars at night, but they're never as brilliant as they are in the red desert. And I think it's because you're at a high elevation, 6,000 to 7,000 feet, and the air is a little less dense there, and there's, of course, no humidity in it most of the time. And you can see for 180 degrees from one horizon to the other, usually in 4 directions. So very unusual stargazing. I love watching stars at night. I know most of the constellations, and it's because I've slept out in the red desert a lot.
Jenny, let's talk about the historical values in the red desert. The trails that have passed through the red desert.
Right.
300,000 or 400,000, depending on what you've read. Immigrants in our westward movement really use the red desert as its corridor.
Right.
Talk about those things.
Well, if you go out into the red desert today, you can still follow, in varying cases and varying ease of access, portions of the Oregon Trail, the California Trail, the Mormon trails, and all of these land trails that people, settlers and immigrants were using. And beyond that too, you find interesting remnants, you find glass bottles, you find oxen shoes, you find old wagon axles, all sorts of interesting things on that. And it is interesting perspective to see that, you know, trash of a couple hundred years ago is now an artifact today. So that's an interesting perspective to see as well. But extending even further beyond that to more of the native peoples, there's a rich archaeological culture and history there. And I think native peoples have been using the red desert as a homeland or a migratory home for hundreds of years as well. And there's an immense, huge, rich human history there. And generations and generations, hundreds of generations of people have depended on the red desert in their livelihood or as a means to get somewhere for hundreds of years.
John, historically, what don't people understand about the red desert? Expanding upon some of the things that Jenny's talked about.
What Jenny said is very accurate. I would add probably that you could read about right after Lewis and Clark, the Astorians went out to try to find a better way through the Rockies, and what they found was South Pass, through which many of these trails go. But that story is a fascinating story, as fascinating as the Lewis and Clark journals, which I've read several times. The story of the returning Astorians coming through South Pass on the word of some Shoshone guy on the Snake River in Idaho who later stole their horses. So they didn't really know that they were going to find a pass. But there were rumors about a pass, the only pass where you could get wagons effectively through the Rocky Mountains, and they were in the Red Desert. They were following the Sweetwater River, but the Shoshones warned them that the Crows were there to the north, so go as far south as you can go. So they were looking down on the Sweetwater River from 10 miles away, often 20 miles away. So they wouldn't have to run into the Crows, who really weren't that bad, but the Shoshones were at war with them at that time. So they went over the Continental Divide, which of course we haven't mentioned yet, but the Red Desert has a great rim all the way around it, which is the Continental Divide. It's the only place in North America where the Continental Divide splits on Oregon Buttes, divides in two, and then comes back together near the Colorado border.
You're speaking of the Great Basin.
The Great Divide Basin. The Great Divide Basin is totally unique in the world. It explains why there's so much water in the Red Desert, even though the annual rainfall is between 6 and 9 inches a year. So it's a dry air, but lots of water, which supports lots of wildlife. And as Jenny said, obviously thousands and thousands of residents in the form of Paleo-Indians who were living there, and then modern Indians later on. But the returning Astorians looked down onto the Great Divide Basin from the North Rim, which is my favorite part of the desert. And it was a devastated badlands to them, and they were thinking in terms of agriculture and water, and they couldn't see any of that. What they saw was land that had almost no plant life growing on it. The honeycombs, the higher ridges of the honeycombs, often have nothing growing on them, which is part of their pastel beauty, I think. But anyway, that's another trail. There are other Indian trails we haven't mentioned that was a good reason to get some of the tribes involved here, because they have some knowledge about migratory routes from the south up into the Lander Valley that came right through the Red Desert.
And we're talking about a Native American presence here that dates back thousands of years?
Well, the archaeologists say that the first wave of Shoshones came in 10,000 years ago. It's disputable. It gets a long time to pin it down. But we do know from artifacts which are littered all over the Red Desert. And I told you earlier I had a heart problem, so I became an inveterate walker, and I've walked a lot of the Red Desert and kept my eyes peeled because I was hunting all the time. I didn't bring any food in when I came in. So when you look at the ground, you see lots of things, and there are artifacts in the places you would never expect to find artifacts. There was once water there, and some of the springs have dried up. In my time, just in 50 years, half of the springs I knew are dry now. And in previous times, there was a lot more water and evidence of people using hunting tools, hunting spearheads, bows, and arrows, and the stone remnants of that are still littered all over the ground in pit houses, indicating that there were stable cultures there feeding on the abundance of food, which is mostly underground except for the animals.
Dick, what's your sense of historical presence? What have you come across that?
Well, we have our historical trails that mentioned by Jenny, and back in about sometime around 92 or 93, our backcountry horseman group and the Riverton wagon group decided we'd make a trip through part of the Red Desert. We chose the Lander Cutoff, which goes from over by Bison Basin to Sweetwater Station. And we gathered up and we took off across that area with wagons and tents and packed, and mainly just to do it kind of the way the old pioneers did. And was a good experience, a great experience as a matter of fact. And we stayed at the old springs that were mentioned in the journals, and stayed at the Sweetwater River, and really had a good trip out of that. And I think along with our historic trails in the Red Desert, we also have some pretty modern trails. Our Continental Divide Scenic Trail goes through the Red Desert from Rawlins to South Pass, and cuts behind Green Mountain, and I might say behind south of Green Mountain, and comes in at South Pass. And that is a trail that was mandated by Congress as a hiking horseback trail, primitive trail. And that trail we've also packed on. The backcountry horsemen have conducted trips along that trail get on the trail and pack along it for 3 or 4 days, and enjoy the trail in the Red Desert. And the Continental Divide Scenic Trail goes from Mexico to Canada, and there's probably right now, I'd say numbers of people in the thousands that are traveling that. And so they're trekking across the Red Desert, and it's a good experience for them to get out there after leaving the mountains and trek across the desert.
John, I'll return to you. You were talking before we came on camera about how bighorn sheep used to be in the Red Desert and aren't anymore. You're still actively studying bighorn sheep today. Tell us that history, if you would.
Well, historically, I suppose it starts with the Hayden Expedition. I believe it was 1871. Came up from Rawlins, followed the Shoshone Trail, which was the Washakie Trail, which was well worn at that time from travois and horse tracks going right across the Red Desert, and it came out near Atlantic City from Rawlins. When the Shoshones went to some of the treaties, they went on that route for treaty talks, and left some very well worn traces that could be followed by a Hayden Expedition. And when they got to the north end of the Red Desert, they were on top of the Continental Divide. They were pretty sure they were on the Continental Divide at that time. They had surveyors with them, and they camped up where they had a good view and commented on the badlands, and that the hunters had gone out ahead of their setting up their camps and came back with bighorn sheep to eat because it was the most common animal in that part of the desert. Well, they probably were common all along the north and western rim of the desert. At that time, they would have been, all of the habitat requirements are met there. And that was 1871, I believe. It's in the Hayden journals that they feasted on bighorn sheep, and they were everywhere. 35 years later, they were extinct, which is the pattern that was going on during this expansion into desert areas. It didn't take long for certain species to disappear. Market hunters were mostly after elk, and they had made the elk disappear in a shorter time than that, to where the Game and Fish Department had banned hunting of elk by 1898 and really got their first field wardens because of the fact that market hunters were making the wildlife extinct to sell meat with no regard for these potential extinctions. Bighorn sheep, the last one was killed by John Davison in around 1905 on Oregon Buttes. And from the stories that came down to us here in Atlantic City, because this is where he brought the carcass in a wagon after he shot it, he was celebrated for killing the last one. Because at that time, that was the mindset. And I think the lesson from that is times change, people's views change. It's no longer acceptable to kill the last animal in a long existing herd in an area. In fact, Game and Fish Department reintroduces them to areas where they've been. And I personally wouldn't mind seeing bighorn sheep reintroduced to that very area. Perfect habitat. It's now in a wilderness study area. And if I could just say one thing about that.
Sure.
It's met with a lot of opposition. I was part of a group to reintroduce bighorn sheep to the honeycombs back in the 70s. And our main opposition came from ranchers, and I don't blame them because their argument was, if you give the environmentalists an inch, they'll take a mile. And that has happened. So I think if we ever are going to see bighorn sheep introduced, and maybe some other animals, to places like the Red Desert that are still pristine and unique in that sense, and because they are pristine, there's going to have to be a new type of method of negotiations between the different interested people. And I think that's probably what Jenny is working on in an integrated way of doing it.
Let's talk about that, Jenny, as we begin to wrap up.
Right.
What are the future studies that will become important to the Red Desert's future?
Well, I do think that there's always an ongoing value in studying the wildlife values, the existing vegetation, the current conditions of the Red Desert, and what will happen too if you allow oil and gas development to go uncurtailed in areas that haven't been developed yet, and what the implications of that are. But then there's also the people side of it. What do people want to see happen in the Red Desert? What are the areas that are important to people, wildlife, and where all these things overlap? And where are the areas that are most important to protect because of these things? And then also, where is development appropriate in the Red Desert as well? So I do think that in this case, knowledge is really going to be power in terms of getting a plan together for the Red Desert to be managed for the future, whether it's how people want to see it managed for hunting, recreation, what needs to stay in place for wildlife to continue to prosper in this area, and then additionally, we all do need fossil fuels in the state of things that they are, and how can we make that happen without really sacrificing this last place in the lower 48 that's the largest unfenced area and all the values that go along with that.
What is the best opportunity for the public to comment today?
Well, today there are a number of ways that you can comment, but I would say that currently there is a process going on with the BLM that they are undergoing a resource management plan revision in the Rock Springs field office. Now, this doesn't impact the entire Red Desert, but a large portion of that. And it generally provides an outline of how the Red Desert will be managed for the next 20 to 25 years. So an example of this is that it is not, there's going to be a drill pad here, here, and here. Rather, this area will have oil and gas development, and this area over here will be managed for recreation. It's more of a framework. And so there are a number of ways that the public can get involved and give their input to the BLM on what's going to happen. They can write the BLM of Rock Springs a letter directly, or they can contact their local county commissioners and say, hey, this is really important to me about the Red Desert, and I would like to see that this is conserved, or this is probably a place that is appropriate for development in the Red Desert because it's already been developed. So why don't we try to steer things in this direction?
Appreciate that. Our time's limited. Jenny Trefferin, John Weinsinski, and Dick Inberg, we really appreciate your time today as we've started to learn more about the issues of the Red Desert, and we appreciate that you've taken the time to join us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.